I want to start on the left-hand side as you look at it with the standards and accountability. One of the things that great systems are increasingly doing is when they set standards, when they set expectations in maths and science or the national language, but also other areas, they set those standards conscious of what the best in the world is like. So they globally benchmark their standards. They're doing this right now in the United States. For the first time in American history, there's going to be common standards in English and maths in United States schools. So they've looked around the world. What do the best systems in the world teach? Physics has its possible national interpretations, but basically it doesn't change at national boundaries. Same with maths. Actually, the same with a lot of the content of language too. So people are consciously trying to set their standards globally benchmarked. David Hawker, who's in the room, thought about this when he worked for the QCA's predecessors, as I'm sure Mick Waters did. Very important, because when children move out into either a big city like London or somewhere else in the world, which many of them will do, if they think they're good at physics, they better be good at physics in Singapore and New York, as well as they thought they were in London. Whereas if we've taught them a different set of standards, they might discover that we told them they were good, but actually they weren't, or some other system had the same effect. The second thing great systems are doing on standards accountability is they're generating really good data, really good information about how children are doing, how individual children are doing, how individual schools are affecting individual children, how individual teachers are affecting individual children. So in the United States now, to join the so-called Race to the Top Fund, a big federal program, the biggest federal program probably in history, a state has to agree that it will build a database that connects individual teachers to individual students and their progress. We will see databases like this developing around the world over the next decade or so. Here in England, we have some really good data in the current department, but the challenge will be to build on it to match the systems that are improving, because it's only with the data that we can do what everybody argues in favour of, which is evidence-based policy making. So that's the second thing, and you see this, for example, again in Australia, where the reform is really powerful at the moment. They're pulling that together now. And then thirdly, down this side, the great systems in the world make sure that every child is always on the agenda. When a child falls behind, the great systems, like the great schools, do something about it. It was mentioned earlier on that I was a history teacher in Hertfordshire, in Watford. That is absolutely true. I think back to my first job, which that was, and teaching. I remember, for example, a boy sitting at the back of the room looking out of the window, which is very unusual in Watford because there's nothing to see. And I said to him, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm thinking." And I said, "Well, stop it and get on with your work." So I ignored the T in my equation. So you learn from your mistakes. But the other thing I did, and I did this right through the 4 years I was a history teacher in Watford, is I taught my class a chunk of the history curriculum, whether it was modern European history or medieval English history or whatever it was, and some of the children learnt it and some of them didn't. And the next lesson I went and taught another chunk of the curriculum, and some of them learnt it and some of them didn't, and so on, and so on, and so on. And when some children, by the end of the year, had fallen a long way behind, I didn't say I didn't teach that properly. I said they didn't do their homework. They didn't really like history. They're not inspired by the subject. Their parents don't care. I had a whole range of excuses. I didn't do what it says here. What the great systems do is they say, that child's fallen behind. How should we change what we do to make sure they get up to the standard too? There was a Charlie Brown cartoon a few years ago where he promises to teach the dog to sing by the end of the week. And the children take the bet on, and on Friday they come to him and they say, the dog hasn't learned to sing, we've won the bet. And he said, no, I promised to teach the dog. I didn't say it would learn. That's what I was doing in my history classes. That's what lots of us did in the 20th century. But in the 21st century, we can't afford to do that. We have to, as soon as a child's falling behind, we have to ask ourselves, how can we change what we do to get that child up to the standard? The best systems in the world are already doing that. In the middle panel, what you see is a range of characteristics about really high-quality teachers, something that is embedded in the way the College of Teachers thinks, recruiting great people into teaching. The great systems in the world are really doing a fantastic job of that. Actually, in England, we've done a pretty good job of that from a low base over the last decade. But making sure that we get many of the best and the brightest, not just straight out of university, but also people who want to switch back into teaching when they've tried something else. One of the best little stories I heard in the last couple of years was an action taken by the Training and Development Agency in this country on the day that Lehman Brothers collapsed, the 15th of September 2008. 6,000 people lost their jobs in the City of London. The TDA opened retail space directly opposite the Lehman Brothers building, and they advertised the possibility of becoming maths and science teachers, and about 250 to 300 people walked across the road, made inquiries. 25 of them began on teacher training, and some of those are now maths and science teachers in our schools. Very innovative approach. Obviously, you want to make sure you get people who not just have the qualities, the intellectual qualities, but also the personal values of teaching, and that needs to be reviewed. But thinking hard about how to get the best and brightest into education is important. And then in the middle there, making sure that they develop continuously, making sure that that sense of collective capacity, not each teacher getting some training, but teachers collectively thinking about how they develop their skills, planning lessons together, looking at the student work, seeing how they taught different parts of it to get certain results. These are what the great systems in the world are doing. For example, in Shanghai, every teacher has to watch 8 other teachers teach each term. So there are many examples around the world of ensuring that development of collective capacity. And then, I won't labour it, but it's really important, the quality of leadership at school level is really critical. The head is like the conductor of an orchestra in a way, the person who's pulling together all the different human and other resources in a way that enables the whole school to achieve that ethical underpinning as well as the standards that are expected, and make sure that each individual person, each child, is properly valued. So the quality of school leadership is fundamental, and you see it again and again in the system research. And then over the far side, a challenge that I struggled with both in my time in the education department and when I was in Downing Street, that to do a big radical reform, whether it's education or any other thing, you also need to change the government department at the heart of it. And this is a tough thing to do. Actually, largely, I hasten to say, since I left, I think the civil service in this country has made real progress with that, evaluating the performance of departments, using outside experts, challenging people to do better, to think differently, to draw on the evidence, to think about strategy, policy, and leadership in different ways. There's much further to go. But around the world, this is a huge challenge. But unless the bureaucracies that lead these reforms can reform themselves, it will be very difficult for them to bring about system reform at the scale and pace that is required. But then systems struggle a lot with the various different types of middle tier, whether it's local authorities, an area that Chris Waterman has been hugely expert and influential in over the last decade or more, or whether it's states in the United States, which is the fundamental building block that everybody in America now knows needs to be reformed and strengthened if they're to carry through these reforms, or whether it's the regional offices in Victoria and Australia, or whatever it might be. But getting that middle tier to be aligned and not to be a barrier to reform is another critical part of it. And then finally, which we in this country in many ways lead the world on, devolving power and responsibility to the school leaders themselves so that they can shape their budget, decide how to spend it, allocate those resources in the way that best meets the needs and aspirations of the students in that school and the community, which actually often doesn't happen in large numbers of systems. Anybody that can put, and I realise I'm summarising a body of research very rapidly, that put those 9 things together and do them in a coherent way will make very, very significant progress over the next decade. And if I was trying to bet on which systems were really going to make progress in the next 4 or 5 years that I'm familiar with, I would bet that Australia will be leading the way 4 or 5 years from now. It's already good. I would bet that Ontario will do very well. And I'd bet that a handful of United States will also make really good progress. We'll see what happens in Europe. A lot of the real progress in Europe over the last decade has actually been in Eastern Europe, in places like Poland and Slovenia. So I just want to take that framework and briefly apply it to a couple of examples from different parts of the world.